What's up, guys? Good morning. This is our 1997 Jeep Grand Cherokee that we bought for $1,000. Bought it about a year ago, and the first thing we did is it had a bad transmission. We put a junkyard transmission in it. That junkyard transmission lasted about a year. Blew up the other day, and we limped it home, pulled it into the garage, and rebuilt the original transmission that was in the Jeep. That had always been the plan. We were just hoping that that junkyard transmission would have gone a little bit longer. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You guys have watched the heck out of that transmission video as part of this rebuild series, and you've been asking for more of a how-to transmission video. So that's what this is. We are putting the original transmission that is now fully rebuilt by a local transmission shop that does a fantastic job. Actually, if you're in the area, Zach's in Longmont, Colorado is an excellent transmission shop. We'll put their information down below. Those guys are great, super nice, really quality work. They really know what they're doing. Anyway, time to put that transmission back in this, and this will be more of a how-to. We'll show you all the different steps that you've got to do it. I'm Joel, this is Motors and Mischief. Let's get to work on our 1997 Jeep Grand Cherokee transmission exchange. Okay, we got the battery cable disconnected, because you always do that first. And second steps is to get the Jeep jacked up. For the transmission, you can jack it by the axles if you want. It doesn't matter if the axles are hanging down. They don't provide any additional clearance if they are, so it's fine to jack it by the axles if that's easier for you, depending on the size of your jack stands. Also, don't jack the engine too high if you're working on the ground like we are, because you can only go as high as your transmission jack can go. So you want to find that difference between as high as the Jeep can go so you can work on it, but low enough that you can still get your transmission jack underneath there to bring that transmission down. All right, so let's get this up in the air. Okay, ZJ's all jacked up, and next steps are to pull the drive shafts. Let me show you what those look like. All right, on the front drive shaft, you've got these bolts right here. There are 6 of them. They're 8mm. You want to just unscrew those, and then this end will come out. And then on the back side here, you got 4 more, so 2 here and 2 on the other side. And you need to undo those. Those are also 8mm. For the rear drive shaft, there's nothing to undo on this side. On this side, you've got, just like the back of the front, you've got 4 bolts there that need to come out. And then this part will just slide right out. It's always a good idea to mark the drive shaft. You can see here from the last time we pulled this out, we marked it there so that you can put it back in the same orientation. You can sometimes make set up a vibration for yourself if you turn that, if you clock it from the way it was originally. So just to be safe, put it back in the way it came out and you won't have any problems. Followers of the channel will recognize our little board right here. We like to take all the pieces as we take them off the Jeep and just write down what they are. Not only does it help with organization, make sure that everything goes back in the right spot, but it's really nice when you're putting it back together because it kind of gives you a countdown to what you've got left, and as the parts all disappear, you get some encouragement to put things back together. So first thing on the board. All right, with both drive shafts out, it's time now to drain the transmission. So in our case, we're gonna drain $100 worth of transmission fluid that we just put in it a few months ago, and I'm sure it will be more expensive right now for the fluid that we gotta buy to put back in a new one. C'est la vie, let's get it out of there. Okay, these ZJs do not have a drain plug on the transmission. You'll have to pull all the bolts for the transmission, those are 1/2 inch, and then pop that pan down and the fluid will pour out all over the place. They do make kits to add a drain plug to the transmission pan. I forgot to order one, so we're not going to do one today. We'll do it on the next transmission flush on this thing. We got to do it at 30,000 after the new transmission, so we'll install it then. But if you've got yours out and you're going to be doing future transmission fluid changes, which are great for these vehicles or any vehicle, that drain plug makes a lot of that drain plug makes things a lot easier. So future video on that. In the meantime, let's get this fluid out of here. Okay, now that we got the transmission fluid drained, next step is to disconnect the transmission from the engine at the torque converter bolts. So to get to that, we need to pull the starter out of the way, and then there's a shield, which I will show you. There's a debris shield across the bottom. We'll pull that out of the way too, gives us plenty of access, and it's not difficult to get to. So let's go ahead and pull the starter. Okay, starter's out, and as you saw, we don't pull it, we just shove it over on the front axle and it sits there just fine out of the way. And then we're pulling the front dust cover because it gives us way more access than trying to come in through just the starter hole, and it's easy to get off. There's just 4 bolts. Those bolts are 7/16. The 2 starter, actually it's a starter nut and a starter bolt, they're both 5/8. Okay, you can see we got the dust shield out. For us, we found it easier to just pull this starter stud so that dust shield would come down. You don't strictly need to. You can reach the studs or you can reach the bolts for the torque converter from between the flex plate and the torque converter by going through the starter hole. But this is pretty easy to get out. In fact, for ours, it just came right out. So that just makes it easier. So we went ahead and pulled ours. So let me show you what that looks like underneath there. Okay, and there you can see the flex plate bolts. And you can see that one, see there, right there. Super easy to get to through the starter hole. Maybe not super easy. It's super easy to get to now, but it's possible to get to it with just the starter. But again, just that little stud comes out and you're good to go. So we're going to now pull those flex plate bolts that are going through and holding the torque converter that holds the engine to the transmission. Those got to come out. Okay, the precise order that this stuff comes out in is somewhat arbitrary. Certain stuff does have to come apart in a certain order, but like we pulled those flex plate bolts, and now we're coming back. We're going to pull the transfer case off. You don't have to do it in that order. You could do the transfer case first, but this is how we're doing it. So to get the transfer case disconnected, we're going to need to pull the bolts holding the transmission to the transfer case, and then we're going to need to pull this wire right there, which is the low range indicator. We're going to have to disconnect this linkage right here, which is for the four-wheel drive, and then over on this side we'll have to disconnect this, which is the speedometer output. Once all that's done, this transfer case will slide backwards, and we'll have a jack underneath it, and we'll bring it down. You can absolutely do the pull the transmission and the transfer case together, and we've done it. We did it that way last time. The only drawback to that is that you need 2 jacks. You need one underneath the transfer case and one underneath the transmission, or it's too, won't sit up there evenly. It'll try to fall off. So we're going to try pulling the transfer case this time. I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other as far as which is more difficult, but that's what we're going to do. So we'll disconnect those electrical, we'll disconnect the linkage and the bolts holding the transmission transfer case. All right, let's get that out of there. Okay guys, update time. We got the cross member out and the mount for the transmission, and the transmission transfer case assembly is going to all come out as one unit because our transfer case is firmly glued to the back of our transmission. We did that for leaks. It is not necessary, and on the downside is if you do that, then they're glued together and they're very difficult to get them apart when you're trying to pull your transfer case again. So, but for right now, we're going to go back underneath the Jeep and we are going to disconnect linkages and electrical. All right, let's go back out of there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and drop this transmission and transfer case as a combo. So in order to do that, we've got a jack underneath the transfer case so that'll support it. Now we're going to pull this brace off. So we're going to undo these bolts here to get this disconnected, and then this entire cross member will come out. So we'll pull that out. It'll be completely out of our way. These bolts right here are 5/8, and these down here look like 9/16. All right, guys, for the electrical and the linkages that need to be disconnected, we need to pull that electrical right there, that electrical right there, and then take a good look at that linkage assembly right there, because it is super confusing when you go to put it back together. That spring will disconnect, and it will be almost impossible for you to remember how it goes back together if you don't get a good mental image, or take a photo, or pause this video and take a look at it right there. Okay, you're gonna wanna pop this linkage up off of there, and then I like to unbolt this right here, and that'll let this whole linkage move out of the way. It's gonna need to be adjusted when you put it back together. If your transmission, if you're not putting the exact same transmission back in, we've got a video on how to do that. So we will link that in the description. It's not difficult, but it's super confusing if you don't know how. So we're gonna go ahead and get those electrical connections undone, get that linkage undone, and then we'll be ready to work on the bell housing bolts. Okay, we also need to get these are the linkages for the shift, or for the transfer case. We've got it disconnected at the end right here, so it's not hooked into the transfer case anymore. That just pops out. You put a screwdriver in right here and just pop against it, and that end will pop right out. But we do have this mechanism that goes from here over to here, and that needs to be taken out. This stuff does all slide on top of itself, but it is a giant pain when you're trying to get the transfer or the transmission out. So what I like to do is just disconnect it. So it's a bolt right here, and then there's another one at the back here that's up on top that you can reach from the side. So I just take both of those out, and then this entire bracket will come off out of the way, and then that gets that linkage out of the way. You don't have to deal with it. But if you want to try to adjust it, try to fight with this as it comes off, you're welcome to try it that way. The last time we did this, we could not get this is a shift linkage that goes up to the shifter in the cab of the vehicle. The last time we did this, we could not get this disconnected from this bracket. So the way you disconnect it is you push these little ears in on either side. You can see them right there. And there's one on each side, and when you push those in, it just slides right out of this little hole. It's actually really easy. And this end just pops off. But for whatever reason, ours would not disconnect last time. So we ended up having to take this entire bracket off, this bolt and this bolt, to get this out of there. And that's why that spring got disconnected and everything that I was telling you about a minute ago. This time we were able to get this off of there. So if you can get this out of here, leave the bracket behind, the bracket will just go with the transmission and everything's fine. You don't need to worry about it. But if you can't get yours out like we couldn't, you could take this bracket off and leave the bracket behind with this. It's just a bit of a pain to get that bracket in and out. So those are your two options there. Okay, for bell housing bolts, you've got two bolts that face from they go from the front of the Jeep pointing towards the back. And those are both on the sides here. You got one right here, and one over here right next to the oil filter. And those are 5/8, and those have to come out. Then you've got, I believe, 4 bolts that go across the top. We'll check those next. First, we're gonna get these 5/8 out of the way. Okay, that footage is not very clear, so we're gonna jump forward in time till we have the transmission out of the Jeep, and I'll show you where those bolts go. There are 4 on top, going from the transmission side forward, and then there's 2, like I showed you, on the 2 lower ones that go from the engine side towards the transmission. But here, let me show you. And then these are the lower bolts that come from the engine side. These are your bolts that come from the transmission side. Okay, now back in time to where we were. Okay, guys, I did not film any B-roll of getting those bolts out because they are a giant pain in the rear no matter what you do. You need to have one jack on the transfer case or the back of the transmission, and you need to be able to drop it down a little bit. The engine will pivot on its motor mounts and allow you to get some extra room to get up on top of that bell housing. Don't go too far because you don't want to put too much stress on the motor mounts, and then also you've still got the exhaust hooked up, because unlike most cars, the transmission on these Grand Cherokee V8s come right out with the exhaust in place. You don't have to mess with it, which is awesome. But you don't want to tilt that engine too much with the exhaust system on there, because there's no joints in there and it'll put pressure on stuff. But you do have a little bit of room, so you can drop it down about enough room to get your hands up on top of there. Now, this is the setup that we use right here. If you want to duplicate this, it works really good. This is a 3-foot extension, and then we put a wobbler on the end, and we just shove this up against the bolt, and we hit the gun, and the bolt pops out. That's how I've always done bell housings. It works really good. You do have to have this long extension. I know this is a very expensive one from Snap-on, left over from when I used to be a Mercedes-Benz tech, and so I don't know if Harbor Freight has anything like that. You could make one by putting a bunch of smaller extensions together, and in fact the wobbliness of that will probably help you as you work your way over. If you're doing it that way, you might want to do it by hand rather than with a gun. We're also going to disconnect the transmission cooler lines. I will show you how those come apart, but they look like they are unscrewing. You don't have to unscrew them. You actually just pinch in the little ears and they will pop right out. Then they'll continue to drip on you while you're working on stuff. So that's why we saved them to the very last. So we're going to pull those out, pull the dipstick out, and then we're going to pull the transmission back, drop it down. All right, let's go on that. Okay, these are the transmission cooler lines I was talking about, and you see it looks like you need to unbolt them right here, but if you look carefully, you can see there's 2 little plastic ears right there. All you gotta do is squeeze those together and this pops right out. Now, it's not so easy that I can do it with one hand, but if you get a pair of pliers on those and squeeze those together, this will just pop right out, and then you don't have to mess with unscrewing that.
Well, that's one way to get it.
Okay, transmission and transfer case are out, as you can see. Definitely a fight, and as you can see, that transmission cooler line, one unscrews and one is the quick clip type like I showed you. So that one's the quick clip, and that one unscrews, and it is continuing to drip fluid as it sits there, which is pretty much what it does. I thought you guys might like to see what the cavity looks like with that transmission out of there, so you can see what linkages and wires are still connected. Let me show you that. All right, so here we are under the Jeep, and you can see this is that linkage assembly I was showing you, where we just undid the 2 bolts that hold it into place, one right here and one right there, and that allowed it to stay behind. You can see it's still connected, and these are the different wires. One thing we did have to disconnect that I think I forgot to show you was this guy right here, which this is the kickdown cable for the transmission. So you definitely need to disconnect that. It is held in by a bolt at the bottom of the transmission, and then that just pops out of the end there. So but yeah, since that just fell down, you can see how much play you've got with the wires. There's plenty of room for them to all come down. Now, we did not disconnect the O2 sensor there. You can see that's still connected. We didn't disconnect this one here at the end. It's still connected. And then see, there's those cooler lines, and then now we're looking up. There's the flex plate, and you can see how the bell housing bolts in. This is the transmission dipstick right here, and you can see it's not held in by anything. It just pushes in there, and all these wires, this goes up. This is the breather hose, and it gets bolted up at the top there. That bracket right there gets bolted to this, and there's another bracket that gets bolted right here, which is this one. So that's pretty much it. There's your 4 bolt holes for your flex plate. This is your flex plate right here. That's your 4 bolt holes that go into the transmission. So that is pretty much it. Now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the transfer case from the transmission and move it over to the new transmission that we got overhauled. So yeah, let's get going on that. All right, guys, normally on these videos, we try to cut them and keep things moving as fast as possible for you so that you stay entertained. But since this is a how-to video, we don't want to shoot through it too fast. I want you to have all of the information that you will need to be able to do this transmission. So we are going to actually go ahead and end it right here on this video. So that'll be transmission out. We'll make that part 1. And then in a week, we will upload part 2 that has the transmission going back in, and we'll give you all the tips and tricks on that. So then we'll have 2 parts. Unless you're watching this video the very week that it came out, that second video will already be up. We'll link it at the end of this. If it's not there yet, then wait a couple days and we will have it linked for you. So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that was a super helpful video for you on how to take out the transmission. Stick around to the very, very end. We've got bloopers. I think you guys will enjoy them. And also, don't forget to check out our store for merch like this. We've got all kinds of really cool stuff there. All right, guys, like, subscribe. Really appreciate it. Peace. I'm Joel. This is Moser. Forgot the name of my channel. Something. Gotta pull something. We gotta do something or it'll never happen. DJ's all lifted. Good gravy. Let's try that again.